Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist. And today I want to talk to you about the idea of self-acceptance, self-love, self-appreciation. If you're anything like me, the word self-love used to really give me the ick. I mean, I'm British. We don't do self-love. I remember when I was at school, this was in the 90s, one of the biggest insults you could throw at someone was, "Oh, you really love yourself." Oh, yeah, they love themselves. And that was considered an insult. It was a way of kind of trying to put someone in their place. And I'd be really intrigued to know if this was the case in other countries or whether this was just a British thing. But to love yourself was to be arrogant, to see yourself as better than. And that kind of self-love, of course, comes from a place of comparison. But that was the only kind of self-love that I knew growing up. So I was very much about looking a certain way. My values were very much around being seen and viewed in a certain way. Being popular and being admired, to me, it just seemed like the best thing you could strive for. And then along came my binge eating disorder, and it knocked me on my arse. It took me from this place of sort of quite fragile but superiority right down into feeling like the lowest of the low. And I hated myself for many years. And even after I recovered from binge eating, that didn't completely go away. In my last video, I mentioned how self-acceptance helped me to stop binge eating. So someone asked, could you do a video about how to accept yourself? So when I sat down, I thought, right, okay, let's think of 5 tips that I can give people about self-acceptance. And I realized I don't think that's going to work. And here's why. There are 2 different types of realizations that we need to have in order to really shift something that feels very deep and very entrenched. And they are top-down realizations and bottom-up realizations. What I mean by that is, a top-down realization is when you hear something or you read something and you think, oh yeah, that's true, that makes sense. And in your mind, you can accept the truth of that. But that often isn't enough to shift something, because we can believe something rationally and it can still not feel true in the cells of our body. Our bodies are very wise and they hold information and they're always trying to communicate with us. We have these microbiomes in our gut which affect our mood. We talk about having gut feelings. Our seat of intuition is often found in the body. They've now found neurons in the heart. So our bodies are speaking to us and trying to communicate with us all the time, but they don't have language centers. The language centers are in the brain. So when it comes to realizing something at a deep level, yes, we need to get our minds on board, but we also need to get our bodies on board, and that realization can come up through the body. Now, of course, that's going to be an enormous challenge. If you struggle with food and you struggle with body image, you're probably going to be quite disconnected. When we have this complicated relationship with our bodies, we can't hear them. So the 2 biggest top-down influences on me and my recovery from binge eating in the terms of self-acceptance was, I mention them all the time, Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie. What Eckhart Tolle did was he taught me about acceptance. He has this great quote, which I'm probably going to butcher it a bit, but it's about accepting the current moment, always working with it, not against it. And it made so much sense to me to accept the things that are outside of my control. If you refuse to accept your body today, as it just happens to be right now, you're getting in a fight with reality and you will just suffer more for that. Your body may cause you suffering because of how you feel about your appearance or because of your health or all kinds of things. But then the refusal to accept where your body at is to layer suffering on top of more suffering. So what this shift in thinking did was it enabled me to free up energy that I was using to fight and battle it out with things that were outside of my control. When we're talking about self-worth and how we value ourselves, what is happening is that is being done through some kind of comparison. You have this list of demands in your mind about how you think you should be, how you think you should look, what your abilities should be, what your relationship should look like, what your life should look like. And you imagine that if you tick off all those things, then you will feel worthy. I really want you to think about this idea and test it out with whether it resonates with you. And that is the idea of we are measuring this idea of self-worth based on specialness. We want to be special. If everybody's bodies all looked the same, there wouldn't be value placed in a certain body type because there's nothing to compare it to. We think that being worthy and being a valuable human being means that we need to be special in some way. If we can just be special, then we matter. Because if we're not special, well, what does that mean when there are billions of people on the planet and the planet is a tiny speck in the universe? This desire for specialness, that is our ego. Our ego drives us to this place. Our ego is trying to make us feel good about ourselves, and it believes that the answer to feeling good about ourselves is somehow being better. That's the illusion. And for as long as we believe that, we will stay stuck in this never feeling good enough. Nothing is ever enough. Chasing, and never arriving. This sense of self that we build up for ourselves comes through judgment. We are judging ourselves, we are comparing. Even if you think you are not a judgmental person, if you're someone who puts people above you, you will be consciously or unconsciously also putting other people below you, unless you think somehow you're the worst of the worst. When I was struggling with binge eating, the way I made myself special was I'm different to all the other binge eaters out there because I've got these hormonal problems, so therefore my problem is more complex. I'm not like all the other people with eating disorders. There can be difference without us using difference to try to decide whether that makes us special or not. This is what I want to say, is that you don't have to be special to have worth. So when I started working on my judgments, and this was where Byron Katie's work came in, to begin with, I worked on my judgments about other people. And I found it quite frustrating because she often says that with her work, don't just do it on yourself. I wanted to just do it about all the beliefs I have about myself so I can change the beliefs I have about myself into better beliefs about myself. It didn't work like that. I had to change the beliefs and judgments I had about others. That had a knock-on effect to me. And I would have said to you, I'm not a judgmental person. I look for the best in people. But if you've got people in your life that frustrate you, that you see as being wrong, it's easy to have empathy for people that have a similar viewpoint to us or that we like. It's much harder to have empathy for people who have very different political leanings or different values that just jar against your own. So as we know, it's easier often to have compassion and empathy for others than it is for ourselves. You externalize something. So when you do the work outside of yourself with other people, it has a knock-on effect. So when I started doing this work, my binge eating recovery came along. I got to a place where I wasn't binging, but I still had several times a week moments of really disliking myself, really not wanting to me, feeling worthless. Like for years, I wouldn't date, I wouldn't put myself out there because I felt at my very core that I just wasn't lovable. Even though my rational mind might be able to say, oh, you're okay, you this and that. I could feel okay about myself when I was doing okay. So if I was being productive, if my food was okay, if these things were going all right and I was sort of doing okay, then I felt okay about myself. But when things felt like they fell apart, I fell apart. Because that core sense and experience of who I was came from this place of just feeling like there's just something defective in here. Someone sent me an email this week, and in the email they asked me the question, what breaks my heart? And the first thing that came straight into my mind was, and I see this all the time when I'm talking and working with people who hate themselves, who have such low self-worth, because it's really hard to change, it's really hard to do anything, to build on anything when that place of self-worth, the ground doesn't seem to be there. So I am recently particularly tortured by this question, how do I help people to shift that at the visceral level? It happened for me, but it only happened for me last year. For several years, I'd been doing the kind of top-down work on trying to accept, questioning my judgments about others and about myself, and I was kind of doing okay apart from some really deep, I'd suddenly fall into a pit and then I'd get out and I'd be all right again for a bit. And then on the 17th of July, I can tell you the exact date, I'd had a week where I had felt absolutely wretched. Like my shame levels were so high, I felt like I felt like a complete coward that week. I felt completely unlovable. I was just like feeling like the worst of the worst, and feeling so just words don't even get me there. And so I sat down to meditate, and it's just a meditation that I often do anyway. And as I'm sitting there in meditation, I have this bottom-up realization, and it doesn't come from here, it came from my body. And the realization was simply this: I could see how, when things went well, when I was doing things well, yes, I was practicing gratitude, but I was kind of thanking the universe or whatever, thank you that I've been able to do this, thank you that this outcome's happened. But when I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, or things weren't going well, I was blaming myself. And I had this real moment where I could see just so clearly what I was doing, whereby things went wrong, I felt bad about myself. But if things went right, and this is quote unquote wrong and right in my mind, things were going well, I wasn't giving myself any of that credit. And the absurdity of it made me laugh. And this kind of visceral release that happened as a result of that day. And I was, even the following morning when I was having a shower, I was just thinking about it and just laughing to myself. Like my whole body responded to that realization. And since that day, which is now nearly 6 months ago, I haven't had a day where I have felt that pit of unworthiness. That release is what I want to give to everybody. Yet because it's this bottom up, because it came from my body, so any of your realizations are going to come from your body, I can't give it to you. I can't tell you the right words to get you there. And that at the moment is frustrating the hell out of me, because I'm like, am I missing something? Am I missing something I could be doing? Am I missing something I could be saying that would help people to grasp this part? So this is what I do when I don't know how to help someone get there. I just tell you what happened for me, and hope that in some way it just opens up your mind to just think about the possibility. Because how it's different now is, even if I have a day where I don't get the things done that I want to do, if I have a day where I plan to do this and I don't do this, or this doesn't work out this way, I can feel the disappointment. But it's not personal. Last Easter, I can remember a moment where I was walking along the canal and I was thinking, gosh, Sarah, you're nearly 40 and you haven't got on the housing ladder, what have you been doing? And I felt this deep shame about not having made, quote unquote, better choices to be a homeowner by this time. Those kind of things would activate my shame. And now they don't. I can feel sadness, I can feel disappointment, but it's not personal. It doesn't feel like it means anything about who I am. And I don't need to be special, and I don't need to be productive, and I don't need a certain number of views or likes to feel okay. And that is true liberation. And I want nothing but that for you.